Hey, Kai.
Katherine, Spencer, I've missed you guys.
It's mutual.
Yeah, miss you too, Kai. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Judy, Marianne.
Should we go around and have everyone say their favorite color?
Whatever you think. Yeah, do you know everybody, Spence?
Not everybody. Definitely some familiar faces or names, but not everybody.
Anne is certified. Kai is
Hi, nice
certified.
to meet you. I've seen you on videos and admired your words.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We're going to touch on the actual instincts, not just based on the descriptions, but what proved to be true with now over 30 years of research. In other words, interviewing people who knew the Enneagram that were enthusiasts like yourself, but also people who would never do it. I had to kind of, in a way, strong arm them or convince them they needed to show their particular perspective to have a more holistic research study. And they've been very generous doing that. You know, they don't want to, they don't offer, but they will do it because some of the Myers-Briggs types will not participate naturally. And some of the Enneagram types are either too busy or feel uncomfortable. So I really appreciate everyone in the Enneagram community that has been involved in these research studies for 31 years now. But I did learn the Enneagram 39 years ago in January, almost 40. And I was pregnant with Spencer. So he grew up knowing the Enneagram from the very beginning. And he participated in all my studies as a little boy. And his friends would participate at the little, 3 and 4-year-old level, what they said innocently. And then at different stages. And Spencer ended up doing his first presentation in middle school on the instinctual subtype. So he kind of knows them inside and out. And a lot of what you would see in the book, he was a part of. He and his brother and his dad, and all of us really put a lot into it over the years as it kept changing. Okay. Oh, we have a question. Judy?
Yeah, thank you. I read somewhere that you wrote, I think, I hope I'm right, that for some people there's a strong dominant instinct. For other people, there are two of them that are dominant. And for three, they're balanced. I've struggled and struggled with this because at every period of my life, whatever I was deeply involved in, it's like my instinct was just zoned in on that.
And which two are close for you? Spencer was showing you where in the book you can see all the different stackings.
For those who are curious, that was page 164. If you have this book, the specific page I turned to where it shows the little bars and actually breaks down exactly what he's referring to is on page.
Yeah, I think my self-pres has always been there. I was on my bed counting my allowance when I was 5 years old, having to pay my own bus fare and my own lunch. But social, I was a teacher, I was a counselor. Social is where I test out, but and now I'm older, I'm back to self-pres again. So, and yet I go crazy if I don't have lots to do and lots of exciting things. So sexual has always been strong throughout my whole life, but so is the 7. So that's where the sexual and the 7 gets me confused for me.
Yeah, exactly. And do you feel you lead with the 1 or the 7? Yeah.
Right now I'm living in 7 now, but for most of my life I was a very strong 1.
So what that might mean is that if you have social in first or second place in that stacking, then it brings up more of a 1-ish quality as well, because would be tracking what other people, like who is doing what with whom, and is it appropriate? So socials do that, even if they aren't ones. In fact, a common mistyping are socials that think they're ones. But if you have both social in first or second position and one in the tritype, it's amplified. So you would naturally be aware of what others are doing and critical of people not doing what's in the best interest of everyone.
Now that's more me, more the critical part of. Plus, as soon as I learn something, the first thought in my mind is, who can I teach this to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it isn't so much being aware of other people unless they make a mistake. It's I want to teach them. I want to help them.
Yeah.
And you're referring to a really important element. This is a very common curiosity, because at different stages of our life, or what's going on in our lives, a certain subtype can be more highlighted because it takes up more of our attention. If you ask your typical teenager, almost all of them will test as a social subtype, because that's where the lens is during that time of their lives. For example, someone who's in a brand new relationship, my very self-pres wife could have easily been mistaken as a sexual subtype when we first met, and then very quickly we figured out that that was not the case. But I definitely thought that in the beginning, because a new relationship can
So fall in love.
Right, yeah. So it can give the impression that our stacks are reordering, but what it really is that we are just, think of it as just you're staring at the second level in a 3-story building, and the second level is the blah 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 subtype. You're just staring at that because that's where the fire is, that's where the candy is, so you're just looking there. But the stacking is still very much in control of, like, what is important to you, what you need throughout your entire life. If all 3 subtypes are in trouble, you will address them in the order of most desiring of security.
Can you not just be healthy and have all 3 of them? That's important to you.
We do have all 3. Yeah, but
you always have all 3, but you have a stacking order.
But I mean, important to you, where you're paying attention to them.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but that becomes a conscious choice, though. So that's the thing, is that without our awareness, we have a natural pull towards 1, 2, and 3, like our ranking. And then we use that awareness to, increase this, that, and the other, because we choose to, because we want to. We think that that would benefit our lives. We want to be overall evenly, healthily attached to all, like you're referring to, things like that. So, but you would have to put work into it. Like, I have to put a lot of work into my self-pres, because I score 18 in sexual, 17 in social, and a 1 in self-pres. So like, I forget I'm thirsty, I forget I'm hungry, I don't recognize I'm tired. My self-pres wife just like stares at me. Like,
that's because you've had a mother that's always taking care of you.
Right, yeah, for whatever reason, right? So I have to be very mindful of the most basic things that naturally occur to someone else. So yes, you can purposely.
It is true, because identifications are important. And I did spoil him that way with taking care of him, because I went without that. So my self-pres, I'm negatively identified with. We can be unaware, neutral with each instinct, or we could be positively identified. Like, you could be social, where you want to find others in groups for the excitement and for the ideas and people and belonging. Or you could be antisocial and say, I'm not social, I don't like groups, I don't like people. But even if you don't engage with them, are you commenting on them and aware of them? And that's still social. You could be self-pres and not take care of yourself. Like Spencer and I aren't good at that. I have self-pres second, though. So I'm gonna look towards my needs physically faster than the group. But we can have a wound that is confusing to us. Like with my social, I'm positively identified. It was more fun with so many kids together doing things. I liked the excitement as an 8-7-4. It was interesting to me. And also the adults were preoccupied and we had a lot of freedom. But some of the wounding, and we'll go into this, was more a result of being hyperactive. And they didn't understand that in the 60s, and certainly not with girls. So I could be distracted paying attention to the lawnmower. So I was neutrally identified, in fact, many ways positively identified was social, but where I could get into trouble was blurting something out or listening to the lawnmower instead of the teacher. And then all of a sudden the teacher would say, get out your history book. And I noticed people opening their desk and go, hey, wait, what are we supposed to be doing? And then I was told I was talking. And then I'd be in trouble for talking, but I really totally lost track. And yet if I had an interesting teacher, I paid hyper attention, which is also a part of ADD and ADHD. And we'll go into that because that's one of the questions actually is how does trauma affect the instincts? And it's very important with the instincts because they're the primal part of us. And how does ADHD or anything that's neurodiverse, like if you have any type of being on the spectrum, how does that impact? A lot of people will identify with 5 and not necessarily be a 5 because they know the way their inner workings of their mind. And, you know, there can be all kinds of variables. Being neurodiverse myself, I have the ADHD and that hyper focus. So the reason I've studied so long and so on my own for no need to do all these studies, it's because I'm hyper focused on the gifts of the Enneagram. So there's a passionate side to people with ADHD, but it doesn't mean they're all sexual subtypes. So it's what do we do to survive? And if our instinct is taken care of, like it's sexual first and you're in love and you're getting along really well with your partner, you kind of forget that it's number one. But are you unhappy if there's even the tiniest thought in your mind that you're not as close as you used to be? And for a sexual, that is very distressing. And you don't even know you're tracking it. I had to find this out through the research. And I go, well, actually, I do that. Like I'd be with my best friend and I might be driving home saying, gee, we're just not as close as we used to be because we had lunch and we didn't go as deep. It's like the need to not just have the interview overview, like the social, what's going on, who is doing what with whom, what's new, where have you been? That's all social. And I'll do that too, but then I want to drop into the real feelings. And if we didn't have time to do that, I would feel like a loss without knowing it. So if you consider that for yourself with your stacking. Now, in the book where Spencer was showing you, there's a whole chapter on stacking because we stack our types, they're stacked. And that came out in 1994. It wasn't that we only had one type or one instinct. We had all 3 types and all 3 instincts, but the types won the dominant type in each center, but that they were stacked in a hierarchical stacking order. So it is important to find them. But to answer your other question, Judy, it's the proportion, it's the order, and then it's the proportion. Like, do you have 2 really tall and close to each other? Like my sexual and self-pres are tall and my social's low. But I'm positively identified with it. I just can be oblivious to what I need to be saying to people.
If I were self-pres, social, and sexual was gone in my 1, would it be the same for my 4 and my 7?
Excellent question. Yes. Now, here's the thing. When I first did this, I thought, great, we stack the types and we stack the instincts, and then how they correlate determines how we use the instincts. And that is true on an advanced level. There's no question. So if your first type is 1 and your first instinct is self-pres, then you would be self-pres 1. And then your second type?
Social.
Okay.
1, 4.
So then it would be social 4 and it would be sexual 7. And so that is true. But here's what I learned. The instinct is more dominant than anything because it's the most primal part of us. So it triggers the whole defense system. But yes, so as an 8-7-4 with the sexual, self-pres social, I am sexual 8, I am self-pres 7, and social 4. If we do it in that order, but the sexual is so dominant that we're going to see that in all 3 types. And if social's dominant, you need to see it in all 3 types, especially in the discovery process. And if self-preservation is dominant, you have to look at self-pres 1, self-pres 4, and self-pres 7 to confirm you are that type, because it triggers the whole system. If there's an unmet need to our instinct, we go into defense. And if there's an unmet need, the self-pres, in your case, would trigger the 1-4-7 to work it out. And you would use all 3 types. But here's the most important thing. They merge, and whatever those 3 types share in common, which is an idealism, would be the utmost value. But if it's social leading, then it would be social appropriateness would be amplified.
It's a lot to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. And that's why it's nice to see the little
Chart in your book.
Yeah.
Visuals are helpful.
Yeah, they're because it shows it with your type and with your instinct. And this is predominantly, at least half of the book, more than half the book is on the subtypes, each breakout. But it also has the basics of the wings, the lines, the history, the types, and the research itself. And then the next book that's coming in the next couple months, probably 2 or 3 months now, we'll have everything on tritype and how to type in the same size book. So then I will have covered most of what I promised. I wanted to do one big book, but it would end up being like that big, and it would be too hard to
Encyclopedia.
yeah,
It'd be
and too hard to
encyclopedia of Katherine.
manipulate. Yeah, I mean, I'd love it all in one book, but it's just like having it hold open is kind of tough. So let's look at each one very quickly, especially for those of you who are uncertain. Like, so I already said we all have 3 instinctual drives. And at the time I learned about the instincts, Naranjo was still not teaching in the US. He didn't for 24 years, and that's where some of the errors occurred. But he said early on in 1971 that he noticed that some people had this primal aspect to their ego type that wasn't just the ego, it was more primitive. And that's when he came up with the idea of subtypes. They're below the ego types. So he took the 3 triads from Oscar Ichazo, which would be gut, heart, and head, or in Ichazo terms, it would be conservation, relation, and adaptation. But Naranjo took them in a smaller version and put them under each type as a variable. It's worth reading about because it explains like the layers of personality on a primitive level, on an ego level, and a higher expression, which would be the holy qualities, the essential qualities. But it's our primal and fundamental way of being. We're unconscious of it until we discover it. We don't even notice it. And there can be mistakes made, like people who have a very strong self-pres, everybody thinks they're an 8 because they're quickly asserting for the self-pres need. So if they're in a group, they'll want the group to know what's an important need. They'll want to know the logistics, time, energy, money. When are we going to eat? When is this happening? And it's about the flow of the day and the process, where the social is looking forward to when they're going to group and sharing their experience with others in a group environment, where the sexual is focused on talking to someone they have an intimate bond with that knows them inside and out, or they've made an acquaintance with someone that matches them. They're looking for the match so that it gives meaning to whatever happened. And that seems general, but it starts to play out in a very specific way. We need these for our species to survive, obviously, but the dominant instinct and stacking of the instincts show the way in which we will be on autopilot and what we're doing unconsciously. Like Spencer and I thought we were the same, had the same stacking order, but then it became clear that the group and what was happening with the group was of greater importance to him than to me. So both sexual eights, but that was different. And we thought we were the same type stacking because we both have, of course, the ADD. So we'd see 7-ish qualities, but I really did have 7 as my lead head type. And he has 6. So we both have 4 as our heart type. So we really understood each other, but the way we wanted to solve problems and what we tracked for solutions were different. And so it shows important distinctions that when understood makes all relationships easier to understand and to give grace. So let's begin with self-pres. Spence, go ahead and just point out the key features of the self-preservation that proved to be true with the research and validated by Claudio and Naranjo, validated my research and findings.
The instinctual type has a fear of not surviving. They instinctively seek safe and comfortable environments and are drawn to situations and people that nourish, pamper, and/or protect them. They fiercely defend and protect their possessions and resources and may view their mate as one of their resources. They avoid situations that are threatening or interfere with their routines, comfort, or health. Their primary focus is on their fears, personal needs, concerns, and resources. They either share or hoard their resources for their future personal needs.
Yeah, you could always count on the self-pres bringing resources with them to an event. So they'd have backup water. And this is before we all carried water like we do now. They might have a thermos or something, and especially the self-pres is like, what if I'm thirsty? What if it's not available? What if we're not taking a break at that time? There could be any number of reasons. But some self-pres will hold on to what they have for fear that they won't have enough when they need it. Other self-pres will have brought plenty. In fact, self-pres 6s sometimes will bring a lot to share with others if they have social second, because it might be of value, knowing, well, gosh, I get hungry, other people get hungry, and okay, I don't want people to take mine, so I'll bring plenty. So don't think it's like that we ever deliberately exclude others. We're trying to understand them. How they can mistype as sexual is that some self-pres make their mate one of their resources. So they'll say, oh no, I'm sexual because I really count on this friend, I depend on this friend, or I count on my spouse or my mate, person I'm closest to. But we have to distinguish, is that person a resource, or do you need to share intimate thoughts or just your worries? If you need to share your worries, we all want to do that as human beings with our mate. But do you need to go deep and talk about things at a deeper level? Not necessarily, especially in a quarrel. The self-pres will want to get their rest first, and the sexual want to keep talking until everything's resolved, and then they can calm down. Spencer, you want to add to that?
I mean, it was very, very well summed up, but the reason I was laughing earlier, as I referenced earlier, my wife being self-pres 6, so of course that's gonna even further. I don't know what difference there would be if my self-pres rating was higher, but anywhere when we go somewhere, I'll be like, oh crap, like I didn't grab napkins and she already has it, or like we're at the beach, she already has the sunscreen, like. And A, her brain naturally thinks that way, but B, I think her brain is also tracking that my brain does not think that way. So,
Smart.
protecting her resource, and protecting her mate, is very much part of her thinking. And she's sexual second. So that makes a lot of sense how my mom was describing this, the self-pres social will think of the group and do those self-pres things for the group. The self-pres sexual does that same thing, but is very focused on the mate. And so me leading with 8, we've had to find our little lines where, because if I totally left it up to her, she would decide my bedtime. She would decide like what I ate. She would decide all these things. So I live as long as possible and I'm healthy and I feel good, and all that kind of stuff. Because the thing that she hates the most hearing is when I go, like my stomach hurts. And then she'll hear like my list of bad choices throughout that day in terms of like what I did or did not engage in. And she'll be like, and you wonder why, like that kind of stuff. Just that lens is very, very, very true. And I'm seeing, it's a my self-pres 6 wife controls all these others. Yeah, exactly. It's a way of showing that they care, right? And
Oh, yeah.
and as long as us non-self-preses can make sure to rebrand that in our brain, then we receive it that way. But otherwise, we'll be like, "Yo, like I'm an adult. Like let me choose my, this or whatever." Like that, and we'll miss the point. So yeah, that's just all I was kind of laughing about and wanting to add is it's very, very, very true.
And of
So
course, I love that she tracks his self-pres because I used to have to do it as his mom.
yeah,
So that's what we do with those we're close to, those that even if we're not leading with sexual, we still have chosen the people we're closest to. And we are monitoring them because our own happiness comes from them being okay. Another thing to consider is what do you sacrifice for? And the self-pres sacrifices for themselves and their future. And this can be a compliment to a relationship, or it can be a bone of contention, because what do you choose to spend money on? Which resources have greater value? And even if it's two self-pres people, they might think, no, we need to eat better. Another might say, no, we need to rest more, or no, we need to tend to our physical body, we need to exercise more. So each self-pres person is going to be tracking their own set of values within the self-pres category. So sometimes you can have self-pres people that are like high-risk sports, and you think, wait, but the self-pres does not want to endanger their body. But they can be the opposite. They might be, health-oriented, but then do these sports where they could die. But they love the thrill of excitement, the need for speed. It's very important to track why people are doing what they do and to discover what they sacrifice for, because each instinct sacrifices for something different. The social sacrifices for the group. Okay, the group needs this. I don't want to do it, but I'm outvoted, and so you do it. Or you do it because you care about the future of the group and a sense of belonging. Whereas the sexual sacrifices for their mate, and in ways the mate doesn't even notice, but they'll give up what they want to please their mate. Now, we all do that to a degree, like with my self-pres friends or my self-pres daughter-in-law. If they need a self-pres need met, I know if we meet that first, then we can have the sexual subtype closer dialogue and experience. But if we don't, and a self-pres friend or my daughter-in-law is worrying about their hunger or when we're going to eat or go do that, then I've lost them. I've lost the intimacy. So we can all adapt to the differences. But remember how I said two self-pres can be different? Well, two socials can be different also. They might, one might be social, the other antisocial. So Spencer, go ahead and read about the social type that proved to be true with the research.
Okay, so this instinctual type has a fear of not belonging. They instinctively seek others as a means of survival. Safety and security come from joining with or avoiding others. They also seek protection by belonging to groups or institutions. Their primary focus is on their social standing, so they often choose jobs and mates with social standing in order to maintain their own. They avoid people and situations that threaten their place in their families, groups, or society. They want positive rapport, but will become adversarial or antisocial if needed to maintain their social standing.
So they will be in keeping with those they've chosen, those they respect, those that they identify with. So if their group becomes antisocial about a certain topic, they may as well. In fact, most of your activists are a combination of being positively identified to fight for something, but the others are negatively identified, so they're fighting for whatever they believe is important. And they will come together, and then once there are people that were neutral that choose a side, then usually there's change. Like in the 60s, when the hierarchy was that kids in universities needed to do what professors said, and professors didn't align with students and vice versa. But there was so much unrest. There was the Vietnam War, there were changes in the hierarchy. And at Berkeley, for example, the students protested and the professors agreed with the way they protested, which was nonviolent. And they talked about it in school. And that was a whole change in the hierarchy. And then that spread across all the universities in the US, that we needed to talk about social change. And it was at the same time that psychology was going from being centered on nature, you were born with your personality, to, wait a minute, yes, you're born with temperament and traits, but our life experiences can totally shape our reality. And this was based on all the twin studies in the 60s, where they took twins and triplets and consciously placed them in homes to show what was different. And like, if they were put into a middle-class household, if they were put into a lower class household, if they were privileged, just to see how the child turned out. Now, it was devastating for all these twins when they found their counterparts, their siblings, but it did show that as long as the child was happy, it didn't matter the class. It matters whether they could be who they wanted to be. And they even tried to choose the parents in terms of personality. But overall, if a child feels loved and seen, they're going to thrive. The important thing I already mentioned was the counterculture part of this social that won't think they're social. They're saying, oh no, I'm totally this, not that. But if they're dressing like their group, which we all do, by the way, you can kind of see a field, like people that have a mindset that's similar or have the same activities. They will dress for the activities of their group. So we all do that to a degree, or we can deliberately go against it. And if we go against it, it might not be in our best interest. So I'd much rather dress like myself. But when I was in the fashion industry as an executive, I had to show a certain kind of professionalism that was demanded of my position. So the first day when I would meet with people, because I'd usually work for a week at a time, I would do all the professional stuff. And then by the second day, I was talking about personality type, because I studied them since I was a kid, but more specifically from the time I was 18 to 20. And I used it in management. So then when I'd say, yeah, but this personality wants to do this or that, and they go, oh, yeah. And then the next day or the next 4 days, I would dress more like me, and it would be accepted. Or if I had to go into the Federal Reserve and teach Team 5, I dressed the way they would want me to. but there was still my personal style, which is more indicative of the sexual type. But you have to do that if you're going to succeed in certain positions. But in other careers, it might be more important to dress in an avant-garde way. And that's all important. See, I think I said everything, but the most important thing is that my mentioning that the social sacrifices for their group. Now, let me just clarify that the social person has chosen others. They aren't just any group. Now, some socials might just choose a group of someone or a group where people have shared interests or certain value, but others will choose certain people and make their own group, but they're still grouping. Okay, go ahead with the sexual, Spence.
The sexual type, this instinctual type has a fear of being undesirable. They instinctively seek a mate that is in sync with them. Being a part of a couple, pairing with an intimate, whether romantic, sexual, or platonic, is essential to survival. They seek closeness with desired others and devote their time to maintaining a sense of intimacy. They attract others through their ability to connect on a deep personal level, their intensity, and their individualistic use of adornment. The energetic imprint of the sexual type often reveals itself through the eyes. This energy is very selective, so they may also repel others. They only have time for deep, intense relationships.
Right, and a lot of times the sexual will suffer from people being confused by them. Because when a sexual meets another sexual, it's like the energy rises, there's more laughter, there's more attunement, kind of that matching energy, whereas the self-pres is more grounded. So if two self-pres come together, being solid and having all their ducks in order is very important to them. And the social has that split attention. So they're tracking the person they're talking to and what's happening with others. I once was in a group of Enneagram people, actually, and it was lunch, and a bunch of us who knew each other went to lunch together. And we were having such a great time that we just were focused on each other because most of us were sexual. But there was a social who was just mortified, noticing people were waiting for a table and we were taking up a table of 10. And that we should probably get going. And it made that person anxious, whereas the sexuals didn't mean to, but we were so involved in the you and me, not just me. A lot of times people will say, well, yeah, I'm a sexual subtype. I really like this person. They really listen to me. They take care of me. Well, that's not sexual. It must be equal. It must be you share, I share. You share, I go deeper, then you go deeper. And you keep going, so you show more and more and more of yourself. But you can be attached or bonded to someone with any instinct. But we're talking about what you sacrifice for. And the sexual sacrifices for the relationship. And as I mentioned, in ways that the other instincts don't notice, like it might be just indulging their mate with something, maybe they'd have a preference, but their mate really cares about something, so they'll just defer to their mate. Whereas they might not just defer to people in general, they might be polite, but when it comes to the mate, if they're not happy, the sexual type is not happy. And so they're going to try and negotiate that common ground so that intimacy can emerge, not just living life, but deeper meaning to things. And the other thing, it's based on this belief that my value is dependent upon how close I am to my intimate few. Like a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I'm a sexual type and I'm close to all these people. Well, that's not sexual. We might be friendly and it might seem like we're self-revealing, especially if we have 4 in the tritype. But the real innermost thoughts, no, they're for less than 5 people. and maybe only 2 that were totally forthcoming. Now, it does vary according to the tri-type and the lead type, but you will find that it varies. So there are exceptions. We can't take any of these details dogmatically. We have to see the overarching. But the sexual will sacrifice for their best friend. And this could be as simple as what restaurant you go to. Like with a sexual subtype mate, they might want to go to a different restaurant than I do. And I will just say, okay, I might really not want to go there, but the relationship is more important to me. And the closeness with that person is more important than getting my ways. And it'll surprise people, especially if it's an assertive type. They'll see that that person's very independent and autonomous everywhere, but then they will adapt to their partner and intimate, their best friend or their mate as a way to survive.
Absolutely. The reason that these things get confused the most is when we focus on what over why.
Right.
It's very, 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 very easy to track a behavior pattern and label that as something, right? It's a very, very, very common thing to happen. The why behind the behavior is what's going to really, really clarify like what is driving the bus, as my mom would say. So, because any number of the Enneagram, any subtype can engage in a behavior. But if you dig into it and figure out why they're doing that behavior, then you get your answers. Because I can't tell you how many times I'm really glad we're talking about assertive types with a sexual subtype, because that was one of the biggest confusions people would experience with me. As a sexual 8, you would see me take charge on a baseball field. You would see me be very assertive in all these scenarios, but then really, really like attune to my mate, or I would attune to my best friend, and I would make sure that and I would take more a little bit of a passive approach. And if you keep seeing me in that circumstance, you're going to see more of what would look like me being passive. But what I'm actually doing is, in a roundabout way, protecting them by not doing this, that, or the other. I'm making sure they're okay because you know what I tend to do very naturally? Take over a room. Not even meaning to, right? Like, I know it's a joke whenever I walk up to a party and I'm like, now the party can start. But like at the same time, like deep down, I feel that way. So it's a very core thing that drives us. So the why is the most important of the 5 W's.
Yeah, it's not what we do, but why we do it. And we do have these 3 instincts throughout our life. Now, I use the order of self-pres, social, and sexual based on Naranjo. We could say that self-pres is, the nurturing from the mother, and that social is then adding people to create a group, and that then we choose the favorite. That's what Naranjo taught. But some people teach the subtypes that first you're self-pres, then you're sexual. You choose one person, and then you can manage a group. But actually, developmentally, we tend to need our resources, but the rules and regulations beginning as a toddler, like the rules of the house or the group, happen. And then we choose the favorite of the group. And then that would be the sexual. But it doesn't matter the order. What matters is your individual order. So this is a great question from a 496. Could you distinguish the depth of connection need of the 4 versus the sexual instinct? Now, let me just say something really important. When Naranjo added the sexual instinct, many of the words used to describe sexual were later put into 4. And they seem similar, but the difference with the 4 is it's at an ego level. So it's about what role I need to have to be elite, distinctive, a one of a kind. What can I do that other people can't do so that I can push down my fear of inadequacy? Now, with the sexual instinct, the only role is being desirable to the people you want, your intimates. And that's why it's desirability. Now, all heart types will say they want to be desirable, but are they like devastated if they think they're not desirable enough to their person? No, they'll go find someone else to mirror them, because heart types need to be mirrored. But the sexual instinct needs their other half, the wholeness, the completion. I am only whole and complete if I have my matched set. So, Spencer, how would you explain the difference? Now, I think there was an example given. As a self-pres 4 with sexual very close, this was my personal greatest dilemma. So what would you say about the differences, Spencer? And INFP, so an introvert.
Sure. So, I mean, you basically took the words out of my mouth when you took the lens of the heart center in general, because that's the route I was going to take.
You probably say it better, say more.
Because understanding that, yes, like the 4, like a sexual subtype, wants to skip the surface chat and go deep, right? So they have things in common, right? But the sexual subtype, so remember that subtypes are the bus driver and your tritype is the GPS system. The specific route you take to get to the location that's important to your subtype is directed by your tritype. So the specific strategies you use, the lenses that you have, all that kind of stuff that get you to that place of security is your tritype. But a sexual subtype feels secure when the close relationships feel close. They are not in danger. I still feel the way towards you that I hope I feel, right? That's important just as much as I'm feeling like you still feel as close to me as I hope you would feel to me. And it's about the bond. It's about the pairing. It's about the relationship. And as long as that is okay, I can sleep at night. I can relax. The 4, the 3, and the 2 will have certain kinds of needs that will imitate that, but they will be very specific. Sexual is generic, where it's like, I just need to feel connected to you. I'll even maneuver like how I feel connected to you just to feel connected. Like that's the bus driver. I want to feel connected. How do we get there? Insert tribe type to figure out the GPS system on how to get there. So understanding that the 4's desire to, not feel inadequate, to feel, as my mom was saying, elite, special, that kind of vibe. Again, me. The 3's need to be, mirrored, that they possess the traits that are coveted by those they respect, or that are somehow have influence over the ladder that they're climbing at the job that they're at, or something that would show like, okay, like this is how I become the best of it. This is how I'm getting affirmed in this, all that kind of stuff. And then for the 2, it's like, how do I feel special to you? How do I feel needed by you? Right? How do I feel useful? And so all of these will want to make us want to connect to someone deeply. So that way we can get the information to then take care of the 4, the 3, or the 2. But what will not change no matter what, if you are a sexual subtype, is you will want that. But if you're not a sexual and you lead with like a heart type, for example, just like my mom said, if you can't get it from this person, you'll just like pivot, because that need needs to get met. And so it's just like, okay, well, whatever, I'll get that need from somewhere else. Sexual, it needs to be that person.
And
Right.
only that person, or maybe the couple of people on their hand. And what most people don't realize too is that the sexual is the lower functioning of the heart center, and social is the primal functioning of the head center, and self-preservation is the primal expression of the gut center. So it's helpful to see a visual, but they're not random. Like if you look at my images, I always have pink for the blood to represent the blood and the heart, the feelings, love, hate. And that pertains to the heart center, but to the primitive center of the sexual. And then the same happens with the tritypes. There are 9 tritypes that are situated under the heart triad. So even if they're really a tritype in another center themselves, their lead type, there are still these wonderful patterns of rare combinations. 4, 7, 8 is actually sitting in the heart triad. And so someone with my tritype is the uber example of the creative person. I just happen to lead with the 8. And you can have a 5, 4, 8 leading with 5 that holds the position of 8. And you think, wait, how could that be? Well, the 5, 4, 8 is a very extroverted in their expression of what they know and what they want to share. So everything can be explained if you go deep enough and wide enough. If you understand that one is more primitive and just who is that someone that you're tracking and you're not as close to. But you can be in a social situation. One time I was in this group where everyone was with the Enneagram and we could talk about that, but they were all social. And they were talking around things and the impact, what others thought. And I want to know what they personally thought and how they would handle a situation personally and what they felt about it personally. No one wanted to do that. They preferred to talk about general principles and values, which were really important, but I felt unfulfilled. So what fulfills you? If it's self-preservation, it's having your stuff. Because that second, I can reach for my eye drops, I can reach for my stapler, I can reach for my water, I can reach for whatever I want. And I'm in my comfortable chair, but still I'm happiest and I'm distressed if I don't have an important connection. Do I love my work? Yes. Why? Because over a 2-3 hour session, we're getting to the real person. And I love that, the discovery process. They're getting to know me as I'm getting to know them. I work with a conversational style to kind of fool the superego and get to the real issues. So I feel totally fulfilled at the end of the day. I might be exhausted, but a lot of people say, oh, how do you do it? I have to make it only an hour and really 50 minutes. And I can't go over. And they're usually self-pres. It's too exhausting. But for a sexual 8, it's energizing if we get to the real. Whereas a self-pres 8 might not even be interested in the field, interested in doing that. We also, in our case, Spencer and I, we also have 4 in the tritype. So we want to go deep. It doubles our desire for depth. Okay, we kind of answered the questions on, are the instinctual stackings important and why? I started to say that there's 3 different stackings, not just one. So one is based on the order of our 3 types, order of dominance. The next is the proportion. Like, do we have a tall pattern and one that's like 10%? And thinking of how it adds up to a total number. And the third is what we mentioned, the identification. Are we positively, negatively, or neutral about each type and subtype? So those stackings apply to both. A lot of people thought it was only for the instincts in the very beginning. They didn't realize when I found stacking, it was for everything. We stack our tritypes. We stack our Myers-Briggs types. There's the type we use the most and the least. And when you find out all of them, you understand more. Anything I didn't say on stacking, Spencer, that you want to say?
No, yeah, that sounded good to me.
Then the other question, which is very common, and that is, does trauma make it so we change type? Or do we have an adaptation because of trauma where we're not our type? And then when we feel more secure, we become our type. The first thing I would say is we never change our type. It just means we haven't found it yet because of trauma. But what we did with the trauma and different types of trauma has a whole lot to do with our instinctual stacking and our tritype stacking. Did you stay passive? Did you become aggressive? Why? How? What triggered it? Again, why? And go ahead, Spencer. What would you say about trauma?
Well, trauma impacts our relationship with a external stimuli and how we internalize it. So that's how we might not recognize a need, even though our stacking suggests that it is secondary, if not primary. The main reason we focus on why versus what is learned. What is what the earth, our lives have taught us. In the end, we want to experience as little pain as possible. We want to get our needs met. And what does one do if having a need is not going to get met, or even worse, is dangerous to make known? Oh, we will do some mental gymnastics in our brains so quick. And it's like, oh yeah, no, I don't need that. Like, blah, 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 blah. Since when? Aren't you a human on this earth? Right? Like that's like exactly how we work. But trauma, right? Like we have this, so the ego's job, right? The thing that dispenses our defense mechanisms, its job is to protect our idealized self. This version of ourself that we hope we would be in a scenario we've never experienced, or tell ourselves that we are at a certain frequency in ones that we have. Now, we still want to see ourselves ideally, but we can only ideally be that if we're getting certain needs met. So we have to change what we think we need to the point where we call it a fact. And then that can absolutely throw us off in terms of our own need. And then we construct our strategies, our understandings off of incorrect information, lacking information. So this could be very, very impactful. And I cannot stress that enough. It's the main thing I focus on in my work as a therapist with Enneagram. Like we might tell ourselves and we might mistype ourselves. We might get our stacking of our tritype and or subtype completely wrong because of how trauma can impact how we internalize an external stimuli that we then put in. So like, for example, like, I guess since we're on the topic of subtype, a sexual subtype who just grows up like really struggling to connect, and it's because they grew up with a really volatile parental unit that did not reflect a safe connection, which then it's hard for us to believe that we could experience that. Right? What we see is what we believe for ourselves. There's a study with fleas in a jar. You put these fleas in a jar, and the adult fleas who have lived a life outside of this jar will start off jumping as high as they can, and they'll hit their head on the roof. Eventually, they will adapt so that they don't jump so high, so they don't hit their head. Right? Survival. Well, the baby fleas who've never had a life outside of this jar will jump as high as they see their parents jump. They don't understand that the parents are doing that to not hit their head. Then you remove the jar and those baby fleas will still jump the height that the lid once was. Because unless we see it as a possibility, we can't see it as a possibility for ourselves. So it completely impacts how we structure that belief. So then we find what we think was love, which our parents showed us, or whatever the learning module was. And then we call that the feeding the bond. And then we fall into very similar patterns, most likely, as what we observed growing up.
And we adapt in extremes too, sometimes with those gymnastics. Or like, I was such a curious kid that when I was, first walking, I noticed the bottles that were milk bottles that were on the floor to be put for the milkman. They'd come, and in those days they'd come in your house, deliver your milk in your refrigerator and take them out. But I wanted to pick them up and I wanted to pour milk. Well, if you're only a year old, that's going to slip right out of your hands. and one milk bottle fell onto the other and it cut my hand. And of course, I didn't like that. But instead of being like comforted in realizing I was just a little 1-year-old that wouldn't know it's dangerous, was my grandmother, who had told me, do not touch those bottles. So obviously I was very interested in those before. But being an 8, I still wanted to see what those bottles did, and I wanted to mimic, which is normal at that age. You start to mimic what you see, and that bottle was picked up and poured. And so I was shamed. I wasn't comforted, like it's your own fault. And yet, when I had it all bandaged, my mother's friends that were very close, like pseudo mothers in a way too, or second mothers, they would comment, oh, what'd you do to your hand? And they were nice about it. So long after my hand was healed, I'd go up to them when I could first talk and I'd go, hand, and show my hand, because I wanted that connection. And obviously that would get me that, because I didn't get the judgment of being bad. It was, oh, the poor hand. And they'd go, oh, poor hand, poor hand. I'd go, and then I'd run off and play. Or sometimes you might, in search of that attachment, see someone that's friendlier, nicer. Sometimes you will choose, another person that fits that need. But it usually doesn't go over well with the parent that has a different set of values. But we're not making the parent right or wrong. Obviously, if it's maladaptive and the trauma is extremely painful, then it's not a healthy situation. But the ego has to survive. And in my case, I needed that closeness. So if I wasn't going to get it from my mother or grandmother, then I was going to get it from someone who was nice about my hand. And that was important to me, making a connection. Now, a social might do that for a friendly connection, but they would do it with a lot of people. I only went to the 2 women that treated me like their own daughter. And so there's the discernment. I was only a year old. Now, I remember even being 6 months old and stuff. So I'm kind of the exception. Most people can't remember that. So that's a great question. And the following question is neurodiversity. How does it affect the stacking of the subtypes and the types? And I did say a little bit about that. What would you like to say, Spencer?
I mean, obviously, depending on which neurodiverse, diagnosis we're going off of, but the way to think of it is like layering magnifying glasses, like what a subtype or a tritype on its own has as a feature, combined with the diagnostic criteria of a diagnosis. What they have in common will be magnified. What are opposites will clash. And so, like, as an ADHD 8, that is a sexual subtype, right? Impulsivity and gluttony are a very large area of focus that I need to place if I don't want to get blindsided by some sort of maladaptive pattern that I might engage in without knowing it. Because as a sexual subtype, I can't get enough time with my partner. And if I am, let's go rewind to when I was earlier in the dating realms, and I was dating some socials or whatever the case may be, where they wanted like their own time, or they wanted to go do something with their people, and I'm always trying to like bring my partner with my friends, and I'm just trying to like I was like, oh, I want I want you with me all the time, and because that's the same thing as the 8 wanting what they want all the time, and ADHD wants that dopamine fulfilled all the time, right? So you recognize like, oh yeah, that's like a major pull in like three different really strong horses are pulling this carriage that direction. So unless you've got at least 3 equally strong horses going another direction, that's the direction you're going to go. So understanding specifically how they impact, that it will highlight and magnify certain qualities a lot more and create very specific inner conflicts as well. Let's go with, like, for example, 3 in ADHD, right? Threes that are very driven and goal-oriented and motivated, and they create systems on how to get there, combined with a diagnosis that is very unorganized, chases dopamine, just wants to like take care of themselves, right? But the three is like, oh, I can sleep when I die, like, you know, like that whole thing, you know, those will clash. And self-pres with ADHD, self-care will be even higher because the need to self-soothe combined with the self-pres need to like feel physically nurtured and secure, it's just really, really highlights social tracking for rejection sensitivity that comes with ADHD and being a social subtype. Right. So it's understanding like, oh, this is what I am, which struggles with this. This is what diagnosis I have, which struggle. Those will highlight. Here are my strengths as a blah, blah. Here are the strengths of this diagnosis. Those will be magnified. Everything else in between will be some sort of inner conflict that we have to find a way to navigate.
That's perfect. And people on the spectrum, it depends on the degree of autism because it's very personalized too. The type of ADD.
Yeah.
You know, the description of 7 sounds like ADHD. And a lot of 7s have qualities like that. But anyone with ADHD is going to get distracted and interested in something and move on, or have trouble maintaining organization. Even if they're good at setting it up, can they maintain it? Well, if you do have 3, maybe you'll be better at it. And if you have 1, you'll work on it, but you'll know that you get distracted and you have to work harder and you have to learn how to do things and learn from other people what methodologies work. Whereas people naturally that are like a 1, 3, or any of the types, they will just know it on their own. They'll set their goals, but getting there is hard for the person with ADHD because everything can distract you because you're fascinated or you're bored. And it's this spectrum. But with being on the autistic spectrum, the main thing that I've noticed is that the introvert that's on the spectrum will mistype as a 5 because they'll know that they're hesitant and reluctant. But the extrovert that's on the spectrum, nobody will understand why they're blurting, why they're just saying things. And it's easier for the person that's introverted, but they may not show up in the way teachers or parents or other kids want them in terms of understanding social dynamics. So when that's in play, and the degree matters, it really matters. Like some kids and adults on the spectrum are more factual and they want to tell you sequentially what happened. They often in Myers-Briggs have the SJ. They need to know what's happening and is this true or not true in this fact. And if you interrupt them, they go back to the beginning and begin with the facts again because they have a question and it just spontaneously erupts if they're extroverted. But if they're introverted, then they're thinking about it and they're hesitant and reluctant, which is why they think that they're the 5. But their fears and concerns and solutions are more those of 6. So it's a common mistyping, but you could be an extroverted 8 and be on the spectrum. And where it'll show up is not reading the social signals. And 8s have trouble with that anyhow, because we think truth is more important than policy and procedure. If that policy and procedure does not fit if there's a rule, let's put it this way, that doesn't make sense. It's outdated, outmoded. We think, why would we follow that? Yeah, we'll make an executive decision. All gut types do that. The 8 will just do it directly without disguising it. We won't hide things. Like when by the time I was probably like 18, I always had a small stomach. I couldn't eat a lot. And I think when I worked for Marie Callender Pies, yeah, I should eat the hamburger, but if I eat the hamburger, I won't have room for the French apple pie with the ice cream. And so I would choose. okay, today I'll have the ice cream because I knew I couldn't have both. And people say, well, how can you do that? Well, because I don't have room for both and I have to choose. To me, it was very logical, but I did it right in front of people. It's not like I secretly had the pie later. It would be, oh, it's a choice. Tomorrow I'll have the hamburger or whatever. But the 8 naturally indulges because their 2 wings are 7 and 9. And the 7's trying to pursue what they want. And the 9 is trying to fit in with others. So 8's just claim their own position to manage that inner conflict. But sometimes when there's a 6 on the spectrum, they can be very confused about what their type is because they're trying to measure how they relate to others, especially if they're a social on the spectrum. Kai, do you have a question?
Yeah, you're just mentioning a social who's on the spectrum, so I had to raise my hand. So I was wondering if being on the spectrum and having social, positive identified social with E, will that contribute to me being a high masking autistic guy? Because half the people can't tell that I'm on the spectrum. They wouldn't even believe me if I told them about it, you know? So I was wondering if that is one of...
Go ahead.
Yes, yes, very much so. So in psychology, what we refer to this as in-grouping. There's this, imagine like a list of empty squares, and it's like a check mark, right? The more things we can check off of a group, the more we belong. Right? So if the perfect person for a group checks off these 5 categories, well, we want to believe that we want to belong. We want to actually fit. So we try to check off these boxes in the perceptions of those who would allow or disallow our membership in that group. So it would actually increase the masking, because as a diagnosis that already feels like, okay, I am alien here. I don't match my surroundings. I already need to not like whatever I feel like doing, do the opposite, like that kind of vibe. And it's like already that questioning. Now you add the social element where it's like, I have worth if I belong to this group. So it'll actually specify the type of masking you will engage in. And it'll make it much more important to you. All on its own, masking is important for neurodivergency, but when it is social, that's one of those magnifying glasses, stacking without question.
Exactly. And how we will mask will be our heart type. So having 4 as your heart type, you're going to have to disguise anything that's less than ideal. Whereas a 2 might disguise it by being more interpersonal and offering their support and help to be valued, even if they're too talkative or too whatever. The 3 will figure out what you value or the group values to be the ideal person. They'll modulate their emotions. All 9 types mask. We all have a heart type. It might be in 3rd position, like it is with me. We can be very disappointed if our primal instinctual need is not met. And so with the social, it's when people aren't asking you about you and what you've contributed and what you've done, and they're not making sure you're in the group. That can hurt a social.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I was in 3 different secondary schools, so it was a dysfunctional social instinct life for me. Real bad.
Oh, yeah.
And usually we become the class clown if we have ADHD in there, because we've got that energy and we're bored and we need the stimulation. So we might do something. Like one time I remember the teacher was saying something and it created a visual image that I thought was hysterical, but I couldn't tell other people the visual image I saw because it was inappropriate. And I just started laughing and I could not laugh. And the teacher's, what are you laughing about? I go, Yeah, I can't say, but I couldn't stop laughing. And then the whole class was laughing. He moved me to the back of the class, then he moved me outside of the class. And then he said, okay, it's time for recess. We'll go to recess early. And he said, what were you laughing about? You wouldn't like it because based on what you said, I had this visual image. He goes, yeah, that probably wouldn't have been a good thing to say in the class. But he was a great teacher and he understood that I didn't mean anything by it. So he tried to let me off. And then another teacher might just think I was deliberately not cooperating, that I was smart, but not acting smart. Like I was using my intelligence to get away with things. And there's always truth to that in a way, but I couldn't help it. I just couldn't unsee the picture. So it's gonna come out in a reaction, and I couldn't mask it. And I tried. People with Myers-Briggs types that are sensing, needing this order, and Myers-Briggs types that are intuitive, they need that freedom and they need the random. So in that case, being intuitive types, Spencer and I in this case, and having the ADHD made continuity. We're really good at reading situations. So it helped us with the social dynamics. But we still could be too much or too whatever. I've shared the story many times where the principal called me into the office and Spencer and his best friend had gotten into a conflict. And Spencer said, Mom, we worked it all out. He's a social 7, I'm a sexual 8. He wasn't paying enough attention to me. And the principal said, they did work it out, but what is this they're talking about? And it's true, if we understand our own driver, the one that's saying you don't have what you need, it feels like we're dying. It's very irrational, but it feels real because the ego cannot distinguish between a real life and death situation and one that just feels that way. But ego death is very distressing. So we're going to try to get what we need, because if you're sexual and you don't have the connection with your favorite person, you feel like you don't exist. You feel like you don't matter. Well, socials feel that way with the group. If the group's not recognizing them and including them, that's ego death. And the self-pres, if they don't have the resources where they need them the way they want them, and people allowing them to seek those fundamental resources, they feel like they're going to die. But we don't know that until we study systems and realize what's happening. We just know that we're very, very unhappy. Okay, in partnership, what does it feel like when you have an opposite stacking from your partner? You want to take that, Spence?
So at first, arguably very painful. This is a very common thing with the couples that I work with, because when you have opposite, you share the same secondary subtype, but what is your first is their third, and vice versa. So the thing that you need understood the most is the thing they understand the least. The thing you prioritize the most is what they prioritize the least. And very likely will define almost opposite in terms of whatever is getting, mistranslated in those moments. So at first it is really painful, let's just be honest, because there's just this total gap in understanding, which therefore, remember, the subtypes are about safety. Tritype, how you get to safety. Subtype, how you get safety. What do we want to feel in relationship? Safe, right? So it's really, really difficult how these relationships navigate without understanding of the Enneagram and Tritype and Subtype and all that stuff. They lean on that secondary Tritype that they have in common. And what they might accidentally, fumble their way through is figuring out how to take care of each other's primaries real quick so that they can both drop down to the subtype that they both equally prioritize for the most part. I know there's like the bar graphs where my secondary subtype could have more of a value than your second, but you get the point. And so the ones that, accidentally figure it out, they're unknowingly like, okay, here's the trade-off, right? I will begrudgingly all the way to like, whatever, indifferently go with this thing that's really important to you that I just cannot for the life of me understand why that's so important. But you know what? You're important to me. So what's important to you is important to me. So we're just going to figure this out, right? That's how people fumble their way through it. When they have this information, they actually, so with my couples, I call this friendies, right? One person speaking French, the other person speaking Chinese. Instead of getting each other to learn each other's language, you come up with a joint one where you meet in the middle and you understand the parts of each other's language and how to convert it into your own. And so you just tell yourself different things, right? You just explain to yourself, like, okay, them doing this, which hits me like that, I'm going to call it different when it comes from this person. Because I understand in this context, this is how they mean it, which would be the equivalent of me doing blah, blah, blah. And then you can actually kind of not meet on the primary, but you can navigate together on the primary and then take care of the primaries, naturally drop to where you guys pair and then go from there. So that has been my experience, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, perfect, Spencer. And another thing is a lot of times with couples, any type, they could be partners, business partners, parent, child, or your mate in terms of your spouse or your partner. But what we mistakenly do is we expect our partner to value what we value. So when you have this reverse situation, those that want their partner to read what they need. Let's say someone is a 2, for example, and they notice everything the person likes or needs, and then they're heartbroken that their partner doesn't know what to get them for their birthday or a holiday or Christmas or something. But I pay attention to what you need. Why don't you pay attention to what I need? And they want the person to naturally do that. And I have to teach them that if their partner is willing to do their third instinct, it's love, because no one wants to rank things differently. So if we do it, we're saying you matter, like Spencer said. The relationship matters. Now, I'm going to stack these differently and think we need to pay attention to this more, but because you matter. And so a lot of couples, one or both partners, need to realize that doing something for their partners, instinctual stacking, is not giving in. It's showing you value the relationship. And as long as it's mutual and both partners are trying to do that, you can go, wow, this person hates doing that. So to do this means they really care about me, because it's what I like. But you can't do it 100% of the time, because we unconsciously are tracking our own instinct. And another place people get confused, as I mentioned, is attachment. We all want a secure attachment. We don't get it. And your type, or your center in which your type is in, your lead type, can influence how you deal with attachment. And if you, some people, have the insecure attachment, so they're trying to get it. But other people who just didn't have the attachment, just, especially if they're a gut type, just learn to go without it. They're just not going to be vulnerable that way. They're not going to engage. And that's what all gut types will do that don't have a secure attachment. They're not going to try and get the attachment. So they don't have the anxious attachments. They've given up. And they just don't expect they'll have it. But if you're a heart type, or you're a 6, or you have 6 in the tritype, you're going to keep trying, because your security depends on that attachment. And this is important to understand. So the distant attachment is one way of surviving, and it could be due to your Myers-Briggs type. Like, if you're an INTJ, you're going to say, well, is it worth investing more in this? Or do I just make more time for doing things the way I want and become kind of ingenious about getting what you need indirectly, or getting your own time, if that's the case? Or it can be that you might have a parent that has an insecure attachment and they want more of your time. Well, you're going to try and make that parent feel okay. But if you happen to have a T in Myers-Briggs, you're going to think, well, wait a minute. I don't exactly feel what you're feeling. And the person that has the insecure attachment, that's the adult that has the F, they're trying to get you to feel what they feel, or they don't feel secure in their relationship with you. But the T will say what? Well, wait, no, let's just be logical. Let's just kind of map this out. But the F will just say, okay, what are you feeling? Okay, this is what I'm feeling. And the interesting thing, for example, another distinction between Spencer and myself is sexual aids. He has the ENFP, so he knows what he's feeling. From the time he was a little boy, now he did grow up with a mother that was saying, okay, we're going to talk feelings. I wasn't going to go through my adult life the way I went through my childhood, where feelings were just like, no, you can't have your feeling. What? But we're showing them anyhow. Don't we want to understand them? Well, no, it just wasn't the family system. But in Spencer's family system, of course, I promoted talking feelings. But by the time he's like 3-4 years old, he could totally describe his internal world. And I'm thinking, wow, because I couldn't do that even as an adult, because I didn't think that way. But here's the thing. The ENTP knows what everyone's feeling, but we don't want to feel it all. It's like an avalanche of feeling that we want to put more at a distance, but we don't know what we are feeling. And it's an interesting thing. That's what the ENFP gives to the ENTP, and the ENTP gives all the possibilities and the variables. So things can be very complementary or hard to understand. So when you look at attachment, anyone that needs secure attachment will think they're sexual. They'll choose their person they want to be attached to, and they don't want to let go of seeing themselves as sexual. But it's usually self-pres or social. Now, there are examples. There's exceptions to every rule. Would you add to that, Spencer? Anything about attachment that you've noticed with your clients?
Long story short, yes. And so I guess all I would really add, just for sake of time, and I know that Anne has a question and everything, but how we get to the secure attachment, which, keep in mind, attachment is relationship to relationship, both in specificity as well as a more broad lens. So we can have a secure attachment with our spouse and nobody else, all the way to we can have secure attachment in romantic relationships but struggle with business, right? And that's more of a zoomed out lens. It depends on our perception of getting our needs met, our perception of what we would have to do to be seen, to be taken care of, whatever the case may be. And that has a lot to do with what we learned when our brain was developing. Just think about technology and children these days. Very quickly, they can just kind of figure it out, right? They just understand like that, just mechanical things work like that, because their whole lives, like there's a photo, a still photo, put in front of like a 1-year-old, and they'll start trying to do this because they know about phones, because that's what a picture is to them, right? Whereas like we had to like learn how to do that, and that confused us at some point, right? So imagine growing up while your brain was developing and was telling your primal needs, like how to, like what is safe, what is dangerous. You're going to take that all the way through your entire life until something or someone shows you that, at least with me or in this category, that does not apply. And then and only then do we switch up our strategies, our definitions, our insights, perspectives, whatever the case may be. So yeah, that's all I would really.
Yeah, that's really important, Spencer. And a major distinction is we are born with our instinctual stacking. We are born with our type stacking or tritype stacking. But what happens along the way is where attachment shows up. So attachment is a secondary factor, but we're going to look at our losses or our experience through the lens of our tritype and the lens of our stacking. Like, is that important or not important? So as a little toddler, it was important to me to have connections. So all I had to know was the person said, oh, poor hand, poor hand. Okay, good. Or I might, like at the beach, I grew up at the beach, so we were always at the beach. I would just be all sandy and go plop on the person that I had chosen as my intimate, these two friends of my mother. And they would just say, okay, wait, no, don't get on the towel, don't get on the towel. They might have just, but I would just like, I was oblivious because I'm like a year old, 2 years old. But they were nice to me about it. They'd say, okay, hold on. They'd shake the towel, they'd go dip me in the ocean and then put me on the towel. They didn't get mad at me like I did something wrong. So that's where kind of little traumas, like if anything you did that was a normal babyhood or 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 9-year-old treated like you were wrong, we're going to have a different feeling about it. But if we did have people in our life that didn't make us wrong, that can balance out our perspective. But if we only felt like we were wrong, then we'd be more resentful or angry, or even if we were more compliant. Okay, so I know Anne had a question. Was it answered, Anne? And then
It was actually just general. Do you find that in work with couples in particular, that the instinct is the most important to work through, maybe even more than lead type and even the adaptive tri-type? Is that the dominant thing?
absolutely.
Mhm.
The bus driver.
Because we're defining what we need based on, is that relationship providing what we need according to our stacking? That was the most revolutionary thing that came out of that 1994 research, is that the instinct is more dominant than the type, because we always believed it was the type.
Yeah.
And Naranjo even taught, well, some people could have a mini passion, he called it, where their instinct was so dominant that it might be hard to tell whether it was type or instinct. And I said, well, what I found, because by the time I met Naranjo, I had at least 1,200 people in my study, and they all received the 6 pages, 2 pages of their type, and then the 2 wings to those types. And they were supposed to read those bullets and cross off what wasn't true and make a check for what was true. And then on the last page, write anything in that was missed. And it was fascinating because it became amazing for proving the significance of tri-type, because people were writing in their instinct with their type that isn't represented. So if they thought they were a 6, and I sent them the 6, the 5, and the 7, they would add in like something about the 7 that was their wing, or it would be a type. They go, well, I'm not seeing this. And it's a statement that didn't have anything to do with 6, 5, or 7, but it would perfectly match what the heart type said, or the sexual 3 said. And so then I could just take the statement and say, oh, this is this type. Oh, so this person has this tri-type. And then just go back and interview them again and keep going. So yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's great. It's such a tool because there's some simplicity in that. I mean, you're dealing with 3 versus 27 or even 9 when it comes to troubleshooting what's going wrong or where that rub is in a relationship with anyone, whether it's a child or a spouse or a friend. I mean, that's a wonderful tool and a knowledge to go to really fast. It's like, what instinct am I? What instinct are they? What's happening right now?
Yes.
Very encouraging.
It's so important. Like when Brandon was little, I was working for myself. So occasionally I had a week off, and I'd say, Brandon, guess what? You don't have to go to daycare. We can go here and here and here. Mommy, no, I have to go see the kids. I go, what? The kids. So we'd have to go to the daycare, and then he spend like 15 minutes to a half hour with the kids, and then he was ready to go do whatever. Now, years later, Spencer's the same age, and I go, guess what? Mommy doesn't have to work. We can go do this. Okay, let's do it now. He didn't, the kids didn't matter. He was sexual, and Brandon was social.
That's
so
amazing. Yeah. It's an amazing thing too, because for you, then you don't take it personally when Brandon needs to check on all his people so he can relax once he knows everybody's okay. I mean, it's like I'm social, obviously I have sexual second, but early in my marriage, I would go out with my girlfriends and my husband, who's sexual, he'd be the first one to call. Hey, when are you coming home? And at first I was just so mad. I was like, can you just not give me some time alone? Like I've been at home. I mean, this is insane. And my girlfriends would be like, unbelievable, unbelievable. And now I understand that he's just saying, I love you. I miss you. I want to be with you. And it was kind of, I think Spencer, you sort of talked about that. It's like it's how do you perceive this that's coming at me and translate it into the language of the instinct that that loved one has, so you can understand what they really mean and not how you interpret it through the language of your instinct. For me, I was like, give me some freedom to be with my people. And I'm also too, so I'm like, I need to be free. Don't tell me where to be or what to do, you know? Anyway,
That's also the two. The two has the strongest drive to be free and to do it was placed on 7, but actually it applies to type 2 and it was put into type 7. And 7s want freedom too, but
Sure.
2s need it. They must have freedom to do what they want when they want, or
Yeah.
they feel that things are inequitable, that they're putting so much time into what others need that when they want to claim that freedom, they absolutely want it. So that's a good point.
Yep.
Julie?
There we go. Hi. I sent this question in, so Spencer hasn't seen it yet.
I didn't get to it, did I? No, go ahead.
No, that's okay, and that's good. So I'm an INTP5, and my husband is an ISTJ. I didn't include that part 8. So he is unusual, an unusual 8. But I'm my own version of autism, and he's his own quirky version of an ISTJ 8.
Yeah, no, that's very rare. It's usually ESTJ.
Yeah. So he's definitely, I mean, we definitely chill. But he's also, I think he's the social version, because he does like to be president of different groups that we're in. He's definitely my champion, because he realized that when I go into panic attacks, if he can get me to laugh by being very ridiculous, it's done. It shuts it down completely. He calls it extrapolation to disaster. And that's right. It's a full-on panic attack, but all he has to do is get me to laugh and it just totally shuts it off, which is incredible that he figured this out. So being that we are in different centers, what's the best way to, I'm still working on trying to be more social, which is my secondary. Do we try to meet in the middle within the instincts, or how's the?
Yeah, so you said he's an 8, and then what's his second type?
I don't know his tritype, actually.
Seems like 6, and his gut type, yeah, if he wants to be president, there's a chance it's 3, but this is just throwing it out. So if he is a 3, 6, 8 leading with 8, then it's very important to get down to business. And I would say 8s in general will joke and tease their partner to get them out of their fears. And whenever you have a gut type with a type that has panic attacks, that's usually what they do, whereas other types will offer different types of support. But I have a friend who has panic attacks, and I reassure her, but I tease her to get her out of it. But I know how to tease her.
Yes.
It's not just any teasing, because teasing can just make it worse.
Oh yeah, because he also, I have a standing rule, because when people kind of typical satirical teasing, I don't get it. Drives me when people do a serious, when they kid you by saying something seriously, I'm going to believe them because they're telling it to me seriously. That's my natural tendency. And when they say I'm kidding, I want to punch them. So if I know that somebody tends to do that, because I know that that's just their style, okay, I let them know point blank, I do not kid. And I say it with that level of seriousness, because I don't want to have to figure out, are you kidding or are you not? So he is quite obvious when he, I mean, especially in this situation, he will come up with something completely ridiculous and I will laugh. And I love it because he knows that that's what works.
Well, 8s are the most sardonic humor, so our sarcasm is sardonic. Like we might be thinking something deeply moving and start to say it and interrupt it and make fun of it because it starts to sound ridiculous to us because we're defended against being in that internal feeling state. But we can do it. But the way, especially the instinct, like the sexual 8 plays with people, and we only tease people we like.
Yes.
Whereas my dad as a social 8 would tease everyone. So whenever I brought over a new friend, I would look at them and figure out what he was going to tease. Oh, you're a redhead. He's going to make fun of your hair. Oh, you're tall. He's going to make fun of you being tall. But it means he's paying attention to you and he wants to get to know you. And they'd go, okay. But then they learned that was just my dad. He'd play with the name. So 8s will give nicknames. And if you understand that they're including you with the social 8, then you're not offended. But I had to warn my friends ahead of time. Of course, they knew my dad and loved him. But as a sexual, I just tease my intimates. And I'm kind of emotionally verklempt if I'm given some sort of honor. And people go, what? Wait, you have trouble doing that? Yeah, I do, because it's too deep, too real, and I'd rather make fun of it. So if he has 6, he would do the humor even more.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Judy, you're our last question.
Just real quick, I wanted to verify because I thought I heard you say something and I thought, I don't know. You said you can put your instinct stacking order and have the top one be negative, like antisocial. And then I thought you said that you could do the same thing with your tri-type. Would you choose a tri-type that was negative?
Well, remember the negative is the identification. It's not the type that's negative, but we may not feel secure with it. Someone could be a 1 and feel like upset that they're noticing everything that's wrong and needing to correct people and tell people and get negative feedback. Or maybe they were told as a child, yeah, don't be so critical. Don't talk about that. You're just too negative. And depending on the tri-type, that really happens with people that lead with the 1 and have the 6 and the 4. They're just naturally going to notice what needs to be improved and what's missing and what could be a mistake or an error. And so they're thought of as kind of downers at times. And this can happen with the 4-6-9 tri-type too, because they're trying to adjust, really doesn't matter anyhow. And so people say, make a decision. And it's very hard for the 4-6-9 to make a decision. So it ends up being the 4 in the tri-type making the decision. And they'll usually type as a 4 at first. But some will recognize that it's 9 and the 9 doesn't want the conflict. But if they feel their type got them in trouble and what they were tracking, they received negative feedback, then they don't want to be that and they'll identify with another type. Like 6s that run fear, they're told their whole life, oh, you worry too much, or no, that's not realistic, or just get over it. And so they will push down that they solve problems by worrying about them and projecting what can go wrong and then preparing what they need to know or do when it happens. And it's distressing. Like Brandon, my firstborn, if there was a bully on a bus and he'd come home and say, Mom, this kid is bullying this person, that person. And I go, is he bullying you? And he said, no, but I know just what I'm going to do when he bullies me. So he had it all worked out. Sure enough, after a couple of weeks, this kid tried to bully him and he knew what to do because he had worked it out. So it's an attribute to a 6 because they may overthink, but they're also coming up with solutions. and they're problem solvers. Now, they may feel anxious in the process, and it's not really encouraged when you're growing up. Like even with Brandon, I would say, oh, wait, I thought we worked on that. You're still afraid? Okay, let's practice that. And then I would practice the gesture, like if kids knocked his hat off. You feel the energy coming towards you, just do this with your elbow. And whoever's wincing is the person who hit your hat off. And he goes, Mom, I could never do that. And I go, why not? And he goes, because I can't feel the energy. So Spencer was just a little boy then, and we just rehearsed over and over again with Social 629 as to how to feel that energy and how to have that automatic reaction. Well, no one had to teach me that. It was if I felt someone coming towards me, and it could have been my brothers trying to get me, I knew to do this. An elbow was a really good way to get people to back off. But he didn't naturally do that. He felt he had to suppress his 6 because people always said, Brandon, that's not going to happen, or that's ridiculous, because he was always pointing out something, or he'd have a reality based on his fear. And so he'd prefer to think of himself as a 2. And he did have 2 in the Tritype. Does that make sense?
The thing that I was really wondering about with 4, I fit the protocol of the 4, except I don't get stuck in the negative feelings at all. I love the beauty. I love the intimacy. I love the one-on-one kind of stuff. But when it comes to going down feeling like there's a flaw and I'm worse than everybody else, that's never fit me. I wanted to be different than everybody else. I wanted to be special, but I didn't have all the negative things of the 4. And I'm wondering if 7 did that to me.
Well, I would reverse your 4 and 7 in the stacking order.
Yeah.
And that's my case. I have 7 second. And so my 4 whines or complains about what's missing. And my 8 and 7 say, shut up, shut up.
Yeah.
And then I might focus on something to release it that other people don't know.
Think of it this way, like, so if your 4 is on the 3rd floor, right? And the only way for your voice to get out is to go through the roof of the building. So the bottom floor is trying to talk. The only way it can get out is to go through the 7 and then through the 1. And then by the time it comes out, it's not a pure 4 statement.
It's looking pretty good.
Right. It's this 4 that's trying to be authentic and real and deep. And then it runs into the 7 who wants to maintain good vibes, keep things light, keep things positive, not do this. Then it hits the 1, which is what we should be doing, what's expected, what. So by the time it comes out, it doesn't look how it started.
That fits. That fits.
So that's why stacking is so important.
Yeah. Or people say, oh, what's wrong with Judy? She's like, why is she so sensitive about that? Because usually you're handling things and operating more from your 1 and 7, which aligns to each other. So it amplifies it. But 4 has a line to 1 and 1 to 4. So they would be at odds with each other, and the 1 would be governing it, if that's your Tritype. But I would definitely reverse the 2 and try that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That fits.
Spencer, do you have time for one last question?
Well, I see that Sarah has a question, and I want to ask her real quick. And before I do, I want to say something to Julie really, really fast. When it comes to the 8 poking, right? Poking is how we hug, right? It's a very important thing. And keep in mind what my mom was saying about like who we poke, right? Intimate, social, self-pres, like whatever it is. Think of that as an audition. If I'm an intimate, I want to be close to you, but I got to see if you're worthy of my.
Yep.
So I give you a nickname. I tease you to see if you can handle me, because my whole life I've been labeled as bearing or this or that. So I'm trying to establish safety without coming off weak, because it's important for me to navigate that balance.
Okay.
So I will poke and I will tease. So if you overreact, I can make that your problem. Oh, you're just, you have a blah, blah, blah up here, you know what. you know, and like all that kind of stuff. And then
Can't
we
take a joke. Okay, you
we
can't
can make that a you problem and move on. But if you show that you can hang and you can match this energy, oh, you can dish it as good as you take it. Oh, I can let my guard down. We can connect. Okay, cool. So
Well,
yeah,
we actually met in a group called the Adventure Club, where crazy things were on the menu and you signed up, you did them, not because you knew you wanted to go skydiving or you wanted to go trapeze flying. It was on the schedule, and you just developed a sense of why not, because it's on the schedule. So we got to do all kinds of wacky, crazy things. I mean, just did the polar plunge again that our group developed out here in Virginia. For Special Olympics, and our group invented it back in '93, and now it's taken over as a great way to and it doesn't have to be the ocean; it can be a lake. We have different chapters now all over the state to do it. But that was sort of our way of challenging it, you know, to kind of let's do this together. And that was actually how we met, was in the club and doing things that were similar, going, oh, we have some similarities here. Cool.
exactly.
Yeah, and remember how I mentioned with the 2 need for freedom was put into 7. Well, there are a lot of errors that are minor, but if you add them up, it can cause mistyping. So in both books, I put in what was lost in the dissemination of the types, so that people could see the types with multiple archetypes and why they might mistype. I could have written a whole book on mistypings, but I could only learn that by studying with every school of thought. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known what was lost, who created what, when the wrong word was disseminated because the person didn't get the right information from the originator, and then they heard something incorrectly and then started teaching that, and everyone taught it, like integration, disintegration. You must know it properly to use that, but very few people do. And that can explain nuances. I recommend it to everybody to understand those errors. Okay, last but not least, Sarah. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
What you said about, I know there's something you said earlier. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Was it something to do with the instinct or the type?
Kind of had to do with, I never liked being, I know there's some things I wanted to talk about that I couldn't talk about growing up.
And was it in your family system? It just wasn't okay. And was it something about being the 648? Like, were you too much? Did you question too much? Did you challenge?
I felt like I was a little much. Yeah. I had to shove a lot of things down and just be compliant and good instead.
Yeah. And could you do that? Could you be compliant and good?
I had to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Some just can't do it. But sometimes the self-pres is good at concealing it.
Yeah.
You're always going to call off because of 4 in there and 8. You're going to call off what doesn't make sense or what doesn't feel right to you, because you have the kind of visceral type of each center.
Yes, I
So
mean,
whenever you have, and 648 has the most trouble with that, because the mental processing is going to be, wait a minute, but you said that. Okay, this is inconsistent.
that's exactly what I think. That's exactly my mental process.
Yeah.
I'm just like, no, you said this. It's not the same.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll come to another conclusion. It's like, oh, maybe some parts are right, some parts are wrong.
Yeah. And like having a son who was a 6, I learned how important he understood that maybe I didn't explain something fully. And I go, oh, yeah, but in that situation, it's a little different because of this. So you have to factor in this or this. And he'd go, oh, okay. And then he'd reorder it. But if I made him wrong for those questions, then he wouldn't have felt free voicing them. But we just laughed and enjoyed him when he would say things that were kind of his conclusions to things based on the information he did have and a projection. But you know what? A lot of his projections happened. So that's the important thing to understand with the 6 is what they're saying is probable. Now, it might be minimally probable, but it's definitely probable. And if a parent doesn't understand that about 6, they feel monitored too much by the 6 saying, wait a minute, you said this last time, or the neighbor said that, or that other adult said that, or the grandparents said that. Like, who do you trust?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you're an introvert, so that's probably how you could get away with it. And you'd think it through as an INTP. But if you're not an introvert, it's harder. Like the 6s that are extroverted usually
Yeah.
face more.
Yeah. My maternal grandmother is a 6 and she's an extrovert. She's the social 6 to 8.
Yeah. Those social 6s are adorable. Yeah. They're just like tracking everything. With everybody. They need constant contact with their people too.
Yeah, she does. She has always needed contact with people.
Yeah, I remember when Brandon would come over to have dinner with us, because he was older than Spencer, and he'd be sitting at my computer just typing. And I'd say, Brandon, come on, we need to be a family. And he goes, Mom, this is an emergency. And then I thought, is everything an emergency? He goes, oh, pretty much. And then I found out that he'd created this site on Yahoo and had said, if you need help, because he had worked at a shelter in San Jose, and so had worked with kids that had all kinds of problems. And so he listed all the things he was experienced on and just email me. And so they did. I just didn't realize it. So when he was saying it was an emergency, it was to that person that was typing to him. But I was just thinking, everything's He goes, yeah, Mom, you just got to give me, 15 more minutes. So we would, because he was just typing so fast and furiously. But having 6 with 2, it really mattered to him that people feel better and understand what they were going through. And he wasn't, he did have psychology as his major. So, and that experience at the children's shelter was really significant and gave him the confidence to do that. Okay, anything you'd say, Spencer, in closing?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood specifically what was being asked, so that way I didn't because I want to be clear on what Sarah's question was specifically. I remember it started off with one of you was referring to something specific and she was struggling to remember certain specific. Yeah. And so I just want to make sure that I fully understand what it is you were hoping to ask, so that way I can really target it.
Yeah, I'm trying to even remember what I asked.
But when you have to wait a long time, we can forget, for sure. But you, just by virtue of asking the question, you have that wonderful atypical mix of the 648 with the INTP. It's not a common pairing. So it would make you, as I said, more inclined to be able to figure out what you had to do to survive and to be depersonalize things more. But the 6s, of course, personalize things completely until you can find a system to put them in. And usually that's what the INTP does, finds a system to survive.
Yeah. I at first thought I was an INFP, but I'm just like, no. But I do feel a lot. But I'm like, no. What you said about the I know there's something. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
That's okay. You can always send it for a question next time Spencer and I come on, because I always have many questions that people ask, and they're all wonderful questions. Those of you that love both systems, the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, I personally learned Myers-Briggs first. So when I learned the Enneagram, I tried to begin with the Myers-Briggs and add the Enneagram type, and it would lead to dead ends. But if I reversed it and began with the Enneagram and then added the Myers-Briggs, it showed nuances that were invaluable. And that's when I knew the Enneagram could hold all other systems. So it didn't matter what system I knew or used, whether it was microexpressions or other typologies. If I began and had the accurate instinct and stacking and the tritype, then the Myers-Briggs just explained how we were going to go about handling that problem. that
Yeah, sorry, I really liked your micro expressions Zoom. That was my favorite.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much I could do with that. And like Spencer grew up with it. So he never didn't know it.
I thought everyone knew that stuff.
No,
So-
they don't. They
Yeah,
don't.
so that was a learning experience.
People that have autism or on the spectrum, they need to learn micro expressions to read social dynamics. And a lot of times the T, Myers-Briggs, it helps to understand micro expressions because then you know how to interpret what you're getting. And it helps sixes because they kind of know what to check on or what the next question to ask.
Mhm.
Thank you, Spence. Go ahead. You can close us up, say what you want to say. And
Yeah, all I would say, since we couldn't really remember specifically what the question was going to be, what I would say for the 648 tritype specifically is you're going to have a very quick tendency to make sense of something cerebrally based off of the initial definition that you gave it when you first received the information, the external stimuli, whatever it was. And as someone with that same tritype, but in a different order, what I highly recommend is just saying to myself, is there any other way that this could have been meant? Is there any other way? So that way, because if I gaslight myself and say that's not how they meant it, my 6 is going to start screaming, because the job of the 6 is to be like, don't get caught off guard. Don't get the rug pulled underneath you. Do not get blindsided. Be prepared for everything, right? That's why anxiety is good, because it helps us prepare for a future negative outcome. What were you gonna say?
I'm actually a 6 with a 5 wing, and 5s they don't want to be blind to what they think.
Indeed.
Exactly. You have to have the correct data.
They have to have like a clear-headed, not blind.
Did you ever think with the INTP that you were a 5 at first when you were pursuing your Enneagram type?
Kind of, I question. I'm like, no, I'm definitely not. I'm not a 5 because I'm more attached than a 5.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of times INTPs will think that they're a 5. So that's great that you figured that out early.
I'm like a quintessential type 6.
Yeah, I can see that in your eyes. I don't know how you guys do that. I mean, I can raise an eyebrow, but I can't move this one direction, this another, and this another, and then move it. I can look surprised, but the 6 can move one eyebrow, then the other eyebrow, and go. And depending on if they're thinking on this, right brain processing, left brain processing, and back, and they can even make their mouth match.
Yeah, I don't like being blindsided.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to be prepared for everything.
Yeah, which is why I was saying what I was saying at the end there, is because fear is one of the 3 highly motivating emotions.
Yeah.
It activates facilitative processes where you are actually grabbing the steering wheel and directing it a certain way as a way to protect. And so when we lead with 6, especially when we have 4 and 8, which I'm just going to call it out there as someone who has that tritype, what we believe is truth is truth. It's done, right? And so we have to slow it down because we're so attuned and we're usually right about this kind of stuff. We kind of can forget that sometimes we could be partially not, picking up on everything. We could have data that we're missing. So when we lead with 6, there is a tendency to feel that fear. And remember, what we are more afraid of, we behave like it is more likely. Because what is the difference in preparatory behaviors between something really scary and something really likely? There is no difference. We prepare for it heavily. And what our brain doesn't recognize is that there is still a difference between those two concepts. So just because I'm really scared of it, and therefore I'm going to prepare for it just in case because it is that scary, that is separate from that is what is most likely. So stepping back and being like, okay, this is one way that this could be internalized, responded to, whatever the case may be. Are there any others? And it's important that it's the and approach as opposed to or, because if you shut down, especially with the upbringing where that was reinforced, it's going to make you want to resist that even more heavily. And then you'll miss the other data that could help you navigate that situation. So all I would throw out is be like, is there any other way this person could have meant that? Is there any other way to receive this moment? And then that way you have more data to go off of. And then you can do what I always recommend for sixes: worst case, best case, most likely. So you establish the parameters, and then you ask yourself, but what is the most likely based off blah, 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 blah. And then you can do whatever you want moving forward from there. But
and you're willing to take the risk. And the thing with the six, it's the apprehension that is so debilitating. But once the six realizes there's nothing they can do, they just do what they need to. Or if it's already a done deal, they can adapt quite quickly. They may be disappointed, but the stress is worrying about what could happen.
Sometimes you want to scream instead of just adapt.
Yes,
But
exactly.
you do adapt anyway.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's a really important element. So just, you know, leaning into like this could be totally just like hokey on my part, but like all my clients have just learned to accept this is how I say things. But like, I don't really believe in weakness. I
Yeah.
believe what we call weakness is a strength being used too much, not enough, or in a circumstance where it is not reflected as a strength. Because the kid that gets in trouble talking in class is very likely the kid that doesn't struggle making friends.
Right.
It's the same exact quality, but because of the instance it is being observed is how it is labeled. So it's really, really important to understand that if there's any part of us that we perceive negatively, which is why we will disconnect our attachment to that, we are actually removing a very helpful strategy if we just understand where to use it and to what degree.
Exactly.
So these are all very important tools. I believe that everything is a strength. It's just we use it in the wrong place, it won't be seen. Hammer, very effective. For brushing my teeth, not so much. So it's just understanding it to that degree. And then that can give us that like inner peace of anything that's coming up and we initially label it something that doesn't feel good. That's not true. It's just not helpful for this instance. Where is it helpful? And we can really start that self-healing with self-compassion, self-understanding, all that data. So
Yeah, that's
Right.
possible with every combination if we understand it, where we overuse or underuse something and bringing it into consciousness and seeing it in a new light, it with more diversity, then we're not so inhibited in the areas that we're trying to push down. Like, you know, I didn't know what ADHD was. And when my friend said, well, if you just like didn't say anything, and being an 8, then the teacher wouldn't think you did it. And I thought, I am me. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not. And I'd rather be hated for who I am than liked for who I'm not. And they're like, whoa. But it was true. But that's an 8. Had I been an adaptable type, like a 3, 6, or 9, and I have none of them, I would have figured out a way to get the teacher to see me in a positive light. But I didn't have those skills. My skills were in seeing creative problem solving and figuring out how to do things in a different way.
And also sometimes the 6 goes to the opposite direction, doesn't prepare enough.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So we're all wonderfully diverse. And the more we understand our personal configuration, the happier we are. We're less defensive. And that part of us does change understanding these systems, even if we didn't get what we needed the way we needed it. Okay. Well, 2 things. People have asked me if I would do one of these events on the book, because I mentioned things that, unless you were in a class with me, and really recently, some things I've put in the book that I just knew but didn't spell out. So if I get enough questions about things in the book, I'll do that. And people have also asked if Spencer and I could do something on the type combinations with the defense strategy, like whether the type uses interjection, or whether we deflect or reframe, whatever we use, and what that really means. And it's important because that was also not fully understood. Naranjo added the defense strategies. But in order to be a type or have a type in your tritype, you must use that defense strategy. and you must have the idealized image and the core fears. So many people try to type based on passion and fixation and conviction, which is great, but it won't help you type. You must have the idealized image of your 3 types, and you must have those core fears, collection of core fears, and you must have those 3 defenses, and it makes it far easier.